Morning, everyone. Yes, I'm actually 74, so I have to admit that I'm not actually young anymore. And I was feeling quite chipper this morning because I had a bit of a cold this week, but it's gone. I've tested, I've not got COVID, and great to be coming here and seeing you all. And I set off from my home on the seafront in Brighton, got into Kemp Town shops, and the paving stones are pretty rough there, and I tripped. And I have a slight graze on my knee and on my trousers. I thought, oh dear, they made a hole in the trousers. It took me back, of course, to being 8 and 9 and falling over all the time and endlessly having my trousers having to be sort of darned up and so on. So I suppose it's something, I'm just going to put this to one side, something about embracing one's vulnerability. It did go through my mind as I tripped. Perhaps I won't go, perhaps I'll stay here. But I have made it, so welcome to everybody here. It's really good to be seeing people in person. Some of you I know well, some of you quite well, and some of you I just met once, like Anna Pan. We met in Deal this summer by chance, and it's nice to come together. We haven't been able to do that for a long time. In terms of the journey, so I'm going to say a little bit about my journey before handing over to Karen and Sarah to talk about theirs. So our journeys within this world of BSS. I went to the workshops for men in 2004, and it's now 2022, so that's 18 years. It did strike me that perhaps I was like some terrible house guest, you know, he came for a weekend and he stayed for 18 years. But during that time, there have been people who've been on that journey with me in those 18 years, and some of them are here. I'd just like to pay credit to a couple of people who were directors of Boarding Concern with me but at the beginning. One of them's here, Alison, and the other sadly not here, but organised a lot of this, is Margaret. So I think in terms of our body, of whoever we are, BSS or BSS-Support, I said to Margaret the other day, if we were a human body, you and Alison would be the heart. So many thanks to them. So in 2004, I didn't really want to go to the men's workshop. I remember saying to my partner, she is actually a psychotherapist and I'm not, I need to make that clear. And she wanted me to go on this workshop, and I said to her, look, I'm going to spend a weekend with a load of dysfunctional ex-public school boys. Why on earth would I want to do that? I spent my whole life trying to avoid these situations. Anyway, the workshop was excellent. The coming together, the camaraderie of all the people on it was very striking. And I had a kind of physical reaction. It's like I maybe had shed a skin or something. And that was the start of something. One of the things I'd say as a survivor is that you may want to think your way out of this, but you have to feel your way out of it. And that's, for me, it's been very significant. So I felt different. I felt like I'd shed a skin. And that was the immediate reaction. So it's a bodily thing and it's an emotional thing. So it was pointed out to me on the workshops in 2004 that the fact that I'd gone into mental health work, the fact that I wanted to close all the large institutions, the fact that I was working for a while with R.D. Laing and his communities, was because I went to boarding school. And I kind of took that on board, but it actually took me a few years later. I was running something with a mental health service user group. Mental health was my area of work. And a poet came along and we did a poetry workshop. He was a friend of mine, this poet, survivor poet, and he asked everybody in the workshop, write a poem about surviving the mental health system. I'd gone along to keep him company, and I just found myself writing a poem about surviving boarding school. So that was the actual point at which it was more obvious to me. I'd taken it on board. I wrote the poem. It was a very emotional poem, and I had difficulty reading it out at the session, and even more difficulty reading it out to my partner later. So I could read it out now, but I'm not going to, because I've sort of done a few of these things about one's experience, one's story, and I'm coming to the point where I'm not going to do it much anymore, because I think it's like Alex was saying earlier, sometimes you can do too much of it, and sometimes it can be maybe a little bit re-traumatizing. So that was how I sort of moved on and understood more. Now the next, I'm going to try this. Okay, the next item is my bear. His name's Recorder for some reason. When I was given him when I was 2, my uncle had a tape recorder, which was a bit of a thing, and so I called my bear Recorder. And he accompanied me when I was 8 in 1956 to go to my prep school, and the headmaster said to my mother, "It's best the bear doesn't stay." The problem was what he should have said, "It's best the boy doesn't stay." Anyway, so he didn't come with me, and so my mother had to take him all the way home, and she cried all the way home, and she always maintained that she was more upset than I was at being left at this school. But in truth, we were both upset, basically. And sticking to the theme of my mother, some years after being at the boarding school workshop, some years after understanding more about the situation, my sister also went to boarding school, and I had to admit my mother to a dementia care home. This was a difficult thing to do, and unfortunately we slightly misjudged things. We admitted her to this home on Halloween, so all the staff were dressed as ghouls, which didn't help. But when we got home, independently, we both felt terrible that we'd left Mum in a completely strange environment. And we were really worried about how she would get on there, and she didn't know anybody. And we realised, of course, that this must have been a little bit how she felt when she left us. So that's another sort of story, a little bit of understanding the feelings when they come on you. The feelings come onto you, you need to welcome them in and then try and make some understanding. In fact, Mum was, having been to boarding school herself, she found the care home quite a good environment. She settled down quite easily and adjusted to all the routines. Okay, so in the time I've been working as a survivor, I did written various things, and one of them, I don't know if this is Nick Duffell's latest book or my book with Nick Duffell, but anyway, this is the book we produced in 2016, Trauma, Abandonment and Privilege. Trauma, for everybody who goes to boarding school, there's a trauma to survive. Obviously it's kind of different, maybe if you're a man or a woman, if you're black or you're white, if you're straight or you're gay, it may be a different sort of trauma, but it's still a trauma everybody has to survive. Abandonment is one of the things that happens to you. The first I see Joy Shavrin sitting over there, the first in your A, B, C, D was abandonment, bereavement, captivity, depression. Dissociation, not depression. Okay. And for those of us that have come out a little bit at the end of it, E stands for emancipation and enlightenment. So that's a little bit about that. And then, telling one story, very important. I was fortunate to get my story in this book, which came out last year, The Men's Accounts of Boarding School Sent Away. Alison was one of the editors of that. And I'm going to just read something from a quote from here, which I chose yesterday. I didn't know you'd be here, but it's from Jonathan Sutton, from your piece there. So this is a little bit about, I'm going to move on here, I hope. Oh, no, wrong way. I'm going to talk about anger, some of us being angry, that somehow we may be angry, we must avoid bullying, and we need to be gentle with each other. These are my general sort of points I want to make to everybody. And I want to read Jonathan's short quote from this book. He says, of course, anyone who's gone through many years of boarding must have some kind of staying power. But what kind or quality of staying power? Sheer teeth-gritting cussedness? There's a lot of that amongst former boarders, and it can provide an energy of a sort. But eventually it takes its toll, both emotionally and psychologically. Can or could we turn the very anger of being cussed to good effect for our own benefit, or for the benefit of others? Nick Duffel mentions a very common tendency amongst former boarders to adopt causes or turn something into a cause in which they can immerse themselves with great crusading spirit. And so devoting oneself to the problems of others can deflect us from confronting and dealing with still unresolved problems of our own. So that spoke a lot to me, because I've campaigned a lot, I've tried to sort of spread the word, but I also tried a little bit to look at my own stuff and try and address that at the same time. So, and I think this is a little bit linked also to how one handles anger, and I think it's important that anger's handled constructively has brought us a long way. But there is a side to that. We must be careful. We dislike the environment that's created in these boarding schools. But we were there. I was there for 10 years. And although we rail against it, it is sort of within us, so we have to be a little bit careful that we don't end up recreating it in some way or other. And that's the issue of bullying. So I think that was my final point, except to say that during the lockdown, I got in touch with somebody in Shoreham by Sea who kind of repairs things, and she repaired my bear. So here he is, transformed. Okay. So these are the sort of things that we reckon have helped us, or in the case of Karen and Sarah, maybe their clients. But it's fairly straightforward. A BSS and BSS-Support workshops, events, resources coming here today. Therapy and counselling. There is an organisation called Boarding Recovery where you can find therapists, mostly in the southeast, but there's a few a bit further afield. Dancing, singing, storytelling, poetry, painting, drawing, collage, writing and literature. I say a bit about that. I have brought a kind of short list of 12 very recent articles which I can put on the table at the back, just to say the sort of things that are being published. Quite broad now, so it's really good to see lots of people writing. There's an article here by Gordon Knott. I can see him lurking somewhere in the audience. There is an article by Simon Partridge, who recently come out. We've seen him earlier. One from Joy Shavrin, and one from Amelia White, which is actually not out yet. It's coming out next month. One other thing to say, interestingly, there's a couple of guys here who've both written about being at Eton, same as Alex, and they're both black, interestingly, and so I think these two books are fascinating, because Dilebi Onyama went a long time ago, about my time, and he published a book, and Musa Okwonga has published one more recently. So with Dilebi, I would say the interesting thing was Eton tried to stop it being published when it was first published in 1972. And then, horror of horrors, he was banned from going to Eton. Can you imagine that? You go to Eton for 5 years and then they ban you from going there? The alma mater. So, Bernardine Evaristo won the Booker Prize. She helped some black authors whose books had sunk without a trace. She helped Dilebi Onyama to republish. Eton gave him a full apology for all the racism he had suffered in his time there, and they said he was welcome to visit any time he liked. He lives in Nigeria. He said, "I'm happy to visit if you'll pay for my airfare." Yeah. So I don't know what came of that. So those are some interesting articles which I shall put out. But then the other things, again, exercise, swimming, walking, yoga, Pilates, personal support individually and group, meditation, breath work, courses, podcasts. Well, a lot of people here run courses. Podcasts, I've not met him, but I can see him, Piers Cross over there. Everybody loves your podcasts, Piers, and we're very pleased that you've been doing them. There's a Facebook group which is around boarding school survival. Films, animations, we've already heard a bit about them. Pets, alternative approaches, medicine, therapy, acupuncture, massage and humour.